Stephen. Thank you, Sarah and Tofik and the whole team at IDC for being so good at defending Christians in the Middle East. Thank you. Also, I should say that I've learned a lot this morning from the panelists. What a lineup. I'm getting a few texts right now really complimenting the speakers that went before us. Well, where do I begin? I mean, it's quite a mess in Lebanon. Right now, Lebanon is facing 50% poverty rate. That's not somebody's exaggeration. This comes from the UN World Food Program, and it's on the rise. Half of them are in extreme poverty. It is exasperated by employment rates that are skyrocketing, and it's really taken away from the youth's ability to really help themselves grow in that country. So we are faced with a significant problem, and unless there's immediate major change in the country, it'll probably fall into a failed state status before too long. Now, having said that, let me just very quickly go through the background with you. About a year ago, the central bank started worrying about whether or not it could pay back its Eurobond interests. And as they were going through that, the government decided to put a tax on WhatsApp, which created riots in the streets. The Cedar Revolution started. The first government fell. Then the central bank fell. Then a second government fell. On top of that, you have at least 20% of the people in Lebanon today are refugees, which is draining the infrastructure and the other necessities and resources there. That's not enough. Throw the pandemic on top of it, the pressure on the hospitals and those that are really suffering in Lebanon. And then what happened with the August 4th explosion is really unbelievable. It was the largest non-nuclear explosion in the last 50 years, 80 years. And so it's a very serious situation in Lebanon, and one that I'm not sure what they can do to get out of it at this point, with a government that seems more interested in their own interests than they are in the people of Lebanon. So let me just briefly go through with you the way ATFL is looking at the policies that need to be enacted that may help this country turn around. I want to divide it into kind of three categories. One is tough diplomacy. The second is making a compact with the people, and its number one institution, the Lebanese army. And third, what the regional interests are in terms of affecting a Lebanon policy. So first of all, under tough diplomacy, let me just start by saying the situation in Lebanon requires a Lebanon policy. It should not be an Israeli policy with Lebanon kind of being part of it, or a Syrian policy, or a Saudi policy, or even a Turkish policy. I think it has to be a Lebanon policy. What is the policy going to be in Lebanon? So the first guiding principle, I think, for the next administration entails that. The second thing that I bring up is, the Trump administration has been criticized for really dumping everything that Obama did, whether it was the JCPOA or Obamacare and other things, and rather than building upon them. It was an unfortunate move by the Trump administration. Having said that, my advice and our advice to the Biden administration will be, don't do the same thing. Let's look at what's working and build upon it rather than throwing it out. So in that sense, the first thing I want to talk about is the area of tough diplomacy. There are two elements to tough diplomacy. One is, what do we do with the government? And I think there's a consensus internationally that we should not bail out a government of corrupt politicians that have their own interests at heart. It won't help Lebanon at all. And so we're not going to throw good money after bad money. So our first advice, and one that Trump has really spearheaded, and France and other nations, the Setter program and other programs have come through with, is don't throw good money after bad money until there's a reformed government in place. The second thing is sanctions. The second part of tough diplomacy. Sanctions you have to be careful with, in our opinion. They seem to work in terms of loosening up some interest, some of the hold that Hezbollah has had in certain dossiers. For instance, the negotiation that started in Israel, with Israel on the maritime border seems to be caused by the pressure of sanctions and the threat of sanctions on people. However, when all you have in your quiver is one arrow, sanctions and tough diplomacy, you could run into problems. And that seems to be the problem that we're having. And you got to be careful about sanctions, not to target one group, one people, one religion, one political party. By doing that, you empower the argument by certain political parties and Hezbollah that this is more of a political effort by the United States, rather than using Magnitsky and other sanctions to go after corrupt individuals, those who break human rights, break the human rights of people, or harbor terrorism. We should make sure that moving forward, any sanctions that are brought on individuals are first and foremost targeting those three areas of corruption, human rights, and terrorism, and being able to prove it publicly, being able to show publicly that in fact there's proof for these sanctions. And it should be across the board. And like I said, it shouldn't only help one group of people. We heard last week from 4 leaders of the movement in the street that yes, sanctions are working. It's empowering us. We like what's going on. But my God, don't look at just one group of people. You're hurting us by doing that. You're making America looks like it's involved in the internal affairs, political affairs of the country. So I bring that as a caution as well as part of tough diplomacy. Now, where the Trump administration has been negligent in terms of supporting the people of Lebanon is they haven't helped them. My God, after that explosion, August 4th, and the damage that has been done, 6,000 people displaced, 200 lives lost, 300,000 people left homeless. I mean, there are problems based on that explosion. What did the Trump administration do? It gave $18 million. I think some of it's reprogram monies. Meanwhile, the Lebanese American community joined together, IDC, ATFL, and other groups joined together, and they're up to about $40 million in sending aid, medical supplies, and medicines to Lebanon. We really need to really work with the Biden administration to make sure that they understand there's a short-term, immediate need for the people of Lebanon. There's also a second need in that regard. There's a need for a longer-term engagement with the people of Lebanon. We have to start to support civil society, higher education, anti-poverty programs, refugee aid, much more than we're doing. We need a compact with civil society. We need to say, you know what? Well, you sectarian leaders are trying to come together or step down, hopefully, and form a technocratic or an independent government that can really run the country. We're going to make a compact with the people, and we're going to start to support them in building their society, working and with NGOs. We can do that. It's proven in the past. And actually, France last week made a threat. They said if the government does not form an independent, reform-minded government in the short term, the Setter monies and other Western aid is going to be turned into a compact with the people. How do we support the people? Maybe we need to do that now and quit waiting for them to form a government. The next step is, look, sanctions are not going as a single element scare Hezbollah away. Hezbollah is part of the fabric of that country right now. It has to be dealt with deftly. And we have to be very careful about what we do there. In that sense, the stronger the Lebanese armed forces become and the more respected they are, the more they're going to be able to do in the long term. So that's another element that we've got to really be careful about supporting and make sure a Biden administration does that. Now, when it comes to regional issues, I would just pick three. One is the Iran policy. We know that the Biden administration is going to try to re-engage Iran on JCPOA, on non-nuclearization issues. But they've also said two other things. One is they want to curb missile technology, and two, they want to curb terrorist proxies in the region. So we've got to make sure that that package comes together correctly in a future administration. The second issue is Syria. There are people on this panel that know more about it than I do, but I think the Biden administration is looking very seriously about how to stay engaged in Syria, how to create leadership again, and make sure that they've got enough power and influence to drive the parties to the table so that we're not part of the process. We've got to re-engage to be part of that process. The last point I'll make is on Israel. There's an opportunity with the maritime negotiations to ease hostilities, to build confidence, a great confidence building measure. And the Biden administration should really put that as a priority as well. I think that's kind of a picture that I would paint for you and for the audience. Thank you.